Let's suppose the president, you were using your experience as a staffer. You were working for the president, any president. Hypothetically a president. And let's suppose the president started talking like he was from outer space. Let's suppose the president became fatigued very easily. He couldn't finish a sentence without taking a nap. Let's suppose the president, he was just physically in bad shape, mentally and physically. Mentally, he may or may not have, you're not a doctor, neurodegenerative disease, but physically you can see you could bake a Thanksgiving turkey in the time it takes him to walk across the stage. What do you think, as a member of his staff, what do you think is your moral obligation to say, wait a minute, the president can't do the job anymore?
I think the first thing to do is the most difficult, which is to say to the president, because the 25th Amendment also provides that the president can say, I'm unable to exercise the powers and duties of my office.
And suppose the president
That would be extremely
says,
difficult, but I think it should be done.
Look, trust me, I can. And it's clear to you that he has neurodegenerative disease and he can't. What do? Do you have a moral obligation as a staff member to go to the American people and say, we've got a problem here, it may cost me my career?
Senator, I think at that point you have an obligation to talk to the vice president,
okay,
who is in charge of the Section 4 process under the 25th Amendment.
What about you, Mr. Wald?
Welcome back to Conservative Call Patriots. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we're bringing you the truth the mainstream media won't tell you. Don't forget to smash that like button if you believe in defending our Constitution and our democratically elected leaders. Today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I want to try to separate policy and politics for a second. I know it's hard to do around this place, but I thought Senator Cornyn made a very good point in his opening remarks. I think Senator Schmidt made the same point that the policy here is very important. And I want to ask you your opinion on the policy. Professor, tell me briefly, I know you came to talk about auto pens, but tell me briefly about the 25th Amendment.
Well, Senator, the 25th Amendment provides the process by which to implement a principle that's in the original Constitution, which is when the president's unable to exercise the powers and duties of the presidency, somebody else exercises them, starting with the vice president. The 25th Amendment sets up a process by which, if there's a question whether the president is able to do that, the vice president and the heads of the executive departments can temporarily basically put the vice president in as acting president, and then Congress ultimately decides the question.
Well, the standard, is it not, Professor? The standard is disability of the president. Is that correct?
Unable to exercise the powers and duties.
Okay.
Yes.
Here's what I would like your opinion on, and the opinion of these two gentlemen here. You have all been staffers. You've worked in government. You've had a boss. In Mr. Spicer's case, his boss was the President of the United States. Let's suppose the president, you were using your experience as a staffer. You were working for the president, any president. Hypothetically a president. And let's suppose the president started talking like he was from outer space. Let's suppose the president became fatigued very easily. He couldn't finish a sentence without taking a nap. Let's suppose the president, he was just physically in bad shape, mentally and physically. Mentally, he may or may not have, you're not a doctor, neurodegenerative disease, but physically you can see you could bake a Thanksgiving turkey in the time it takes him to walk across the stage. What do you think, as a member of his staff, what do you think is your moral obligation to say, wait a minute, the president can't do the job anymore? I know you're loyal folks. You believe in your president, this president, whichever president. I'm speaking hypothetically. You're loyal. You want to be a good staffer, but you also have a moral obligation. How do you reach that decision, Professor? And I'll go to each of you.
Senator, I think the first thing you would have to do in a situation like that is exercise your own judgment. How serious is this problem? Because everybody has moments when they lose focus, it happens. But if somebody thinks this is a really serious problem, I think the first thing to do is the most difficult, which is to say to the president, because the 25th Amendment also provides that the president can say, I'm unable to exercise the powers and duties of my office.
And suppose the president
That would be extremely
says,
difficult, but I think it should be done.
Look, trust me, I can. And it's clear to you that he has neurodegenerative disease and he can't. What do? Do you have a moral obligation as a staff member to go to the American people and say, we've got a problem here, it may cost me my career?
Senator, I think at that point you have an obligation to talk to the vice president,
Okay.
who is in charge of the Section 4 process under the 25th Amendment.
What about you, Mr. Wald? Do you have a moral obligation? I understand you want it to go away, you want to work it out with him, but you can't. When does a staffer have a moral obligation to stand up and say he can't be president anymore, or she can't be?
Well, Senator, the 25th Amendment only works if individual staffers or officers of the United States exercise that kind of moral judgment.
That's what I'm asking you.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think always, as the professor said, I mean, the presidency is an enormous burden, so it would be not one instance, it would have to be several instances of a failure to exercise judgment.
How do you make that decision? You're the staffer, I get it.
Yeah, well, I think it begins with prayer, of course, but after that, I think it's conversation with other staffers, and if you're unable to confront the president or to raise the issue with the vice president, you should resign.
What about you, Mr. Spicer? Do you stand up and do it and tell the truth and run, or do you have a greater obligation to your boss?
Well, luckily, I didn't have that problem. But I would say that you have a moral obligation as an American, as a citizen, as a human being. If the leader of the free world cannot conduct themselves to make the decisions that are critical to this country and to the world, you absolutely have a moral obligation to follow the chain of command. And if they don't act, then you must.
Do either of you gentlemen disagree with that? Professor?
Senator, I think acting means talking to the people who have the responsibility or in a position under the Constitution to do something.
You don't
about the
agree with
situation.
Mr. Spicer?
Senator, I'm not sure exactly what he has in mind, other than talking to the people who can make the decision.
I'm just trying to ask, you've all been staffers. Suppose you go to everybody you're supposed to go to, and they all say, my advice to you is to shut up. Do you have a moral obligation as a staffer to say, look, this person can't be president of the United States. It isn't policy. He physically can't do it.
Senator Kennedy, it's not a question of whether a staffer has that obligation. It's whether you as an American have that obligation. And I think each and every one of us does.
Yeah, but you can see it. An American can't. Professor, what do you think?
Senator, I think there are situations under which someone in that position should speak publicly, but I also think that the views of a single individual who is not the person who is constitutionally responsible for taking measures should be considered by the public as just the views of one individual who has some information about the subject.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Today, we're breaking down a Senate hearing that should terrify every freedom-loving American. What you're about to see is a chilling discussion about how government bureaucrats and deep state operatives can potentially remove a sitting president using the 25th Amendment as their weapon of choice. Let me set the stage for you. We have a law professor and former government staffers, including Sean Spicer, discussing scenarios where White House staff might feel compelled to remove a president they deem unfit. On the surface, this sounds reasonable. The 25th Amendment exists for genuine cases of presidential incapacity. But listen carefully to what's really being discussed here. Senator Kennedy poses a hypothetical about a president showing signs of physical and mental decline. The professor explains that the 25th Amendment allows the vice president and cabinet members to temporarily remove presidential powers. But here's where it gets concerning for conservatives. The discussion quickly shifts to the moral obligations of staffers. Think about this, patriots. We're talking about unelected bureaucrats, people who weren't chosen by the American people, potentially having the power to influence or even trigger the removal of our elected commander-in-chief. When a professor suggests that concerned staffers should speak to the vice president, we're essentially creating a system where career government employees can conspire against the president. These are the same people who form what we call the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy that remains regardless of which party wins elections. Sean Spicer makes an important point about moral obligation as Americans, and I respect that. But we need to be very careful about who gets to make these determinations. The American people elected their president. That choice shouldn't be overturned by government employees who disagree with policy decisions or personal style. Here's what really concerns me about this entire discussion. Throughout the Trump presidency, we saw unprecedented resistance from within the government. We had anonymous op-eds, leaks to the press, and career officials actively working against the administration's agenda. Now we're having academic discussions about when these same people should feel morally obligated to remove a president. The 25th Amendment was designed for clear cases of incapacity, like if a president were in a coma or had a severe stroke. It wasn't meant to be a tool for political disagreement or personality conflicts. But listen to how broadly these panelists interpret when it might be appropriate to use it. They talk about multiple instances of poor judgment, about presidents who can't finish sentences, about consulting with other staffers, and praying about the decision. This opens the door for subjective interpretations based on political bias rather than objective medical incapacity. Think about how this could be weaponized against any conservative president. Career bureaucrats who oppose conservative policies could claim the president is unfit, not because of genuine incapacity, but because they disagree with the direction of the administration. They could point to controversial statements, unconventional leadership styles, or policy decisions they find objectionable as evidence of unfitness. The professor mentions that individual testimony should be viewed as just one person's perspective. But in our current media environment, a single staffer's allegations could create a political firestorm. We've seen how anonymous sources and whistleblowers can dominate news cycles and influence public opinion. What's particularly troubling is the suggestion that staffers should go public if internal channels fail. This essentially encourages government employees to become political actors, using their positions to influence public opinion against their elected boss. This is exactly the kind of behavior that undermines democratic governance and the will of the people. Patriots, we need to understand that the Constitution gives us the power to remove presidents through elections and impeachment, not through bureaucratic coups. The 25th Amendment should be reserved for genuine medical emergencies, not political disagreements or personal animosity toward president's style or policies. We must remain vigilant against any attempt to expand the use of the 25th Amendment beyond its original intent. Our democracy depends on respecting the choice of the American people and limiting the power of unelected officials to override that choice. This discussion reveals the ongoing tension between the permanent government bureaucracy and elected leadership. As conservatives, we believe in limited government and democratic accountability. We cannot allow career officials to become the arbiters of presidential fitness based on their personal political preferences. The next time you hear discussions about invoking the 25th Amendment, ask yourself whether it's really about incapacity or whether it's about politics. Ask whether the people making these suggestions represent the will of the American people or their own ideological agenda. That's all for today, patriots. Make sure you're subscribed to Conservative Call for more truth that the establishment doesn't want you to hear. Share this video with fellow patriots who need to understand what's really at stake. Until next time, keep fighting for our Constitution and our Republic.